Joanna Penn, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And Jodi Burnett, back on the show. You've been on here once or twice, I think.
Yeah, I'm addicted. I think this might be our fourth time, Patrick.
Oh,
I
wow.
love your
Yes.
show.
You're
Thanks
my
for inviting me
celebrity
again.
co-host for today. I love it. So let's start out with the intros. Joanna, in case people have been living under a rock or something and don't know who you are, could you just kind of give us a lowdown of who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I write nonfiction for authors as Joanna Penn, and I write thrillers, dark fantasy, horror, crime, other things as JF Penn. And I have a podcast, the Creative Penn Podcast, and that is Penn with a double N.
Jodi?
Yeah, well, I'm a thriller suspense writer. I have four series, two of which are federal canine series. Started writing in 2019. I have my next book is coming out tomorrow, so that'll make 16 books for me, and which is exciting. Big day tomorrow. Before that, I was a Marine wife, and we have four children we raised the early years in the Marine Corps. And then, gosh, I've done work with teens. I've done all sorts of crazy kinds of jobs, and then eventually started writing, and here I am.
Very good. Well, I wanted to start out with Joanna. I read your book, Writing the Shadow. I finished it a couple of weeks ago and I got it in audio because I love audio and I absolutely loved it. Thank you for writing it. I think it brought a lot of stuff to light that sometimes we don't like to talk about or think about or whatever the case may be. But I love the trigger warning in your book. It may trigger you. I hope it does. I absolutely love that. And I hope this podcast
Awesome.
triggers people to tell their friends, to listen to my show. But can you explain this?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is on two levels. One is that we're all old enough here to know that trigger warnings were not around when we were
No.
younger. We just got in there and made up our own minds about stuff. But I did put a trigger warning in because Writing the Shadow is about the Jungian psychology principle of the shadow, which is this unconscious part of our personality, the parts of us that don't match up to what society wants us to be, or that we don't expect us to be, or our family, or our religion, our church, our spouse. There are so many ways that we are told we have to behave, or we should react in a certain way, or all the things that are set up in society. But actually in later life, especially, I think we all start to examine those things, and we come across things that perhaps we've either repressed or denied or hidden from other people. And as we start to get to know ourselves, and Patrick, you've come on my show to talk about some of the things that came up for you when you were writing crime, stuff that happened in the police that
Right.
perhaps come back years later. And it's like, oh, I don't know, did I how has that affected me? And maybe you just push that down when you have to do the job, and then later on they come out. And so just coming back to the word trigger, there is this sort of trend in the publishing industry to put
There
trigger
is.
warnings in to sort of prevent people from being hurt. And yet the whole principle of this book, Writing the Shadow, is turn your inner darkness into words. Is the idea is that we examine why we get triggered by things, and these can be big things about society, which is fair enough, but the little things. So when you react far more than a normal person would around something, you then have to kind of question that and say, why am I reacting so much on that? And I'll take an example in the author community right now, the indie author community, which is the attitude towards generative AI. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, it is. Boy, some people are
They're
going nutso.
they're digging their heels, that's for sure.
Yes, and I had a wave of kind of hate and haters a few years back, and we're in the middle of another wave right now. And the fact is, people are very scared. People are afraid. They're anxious. They're worried, and all those things are emotional reactions that, if people stop and examine, they will do better as the changes come. So it's meant to be a psychologically kind of healthy thing to examine why we react in certain ways, in an over-the-top fashion.
Right.
So anyway, I'm really glad you enjoyed the book. And of course, I narrate the audio. So if people like my accent, you might like the audiobook.
See, that's what I love. I'm always disappointed when an author doesn't narrate their own book. especially if it's like a singer or somebody, their voices, they're living. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, that's not you. Yeah, like, come on, you should narrate your own. I mean, I know it's sometimes it's not practical, it's time consuming, it's a thing. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Well, now we have AI that can clone your own voice, and you can have your AI read in your own voice. It doesn't take any time at all, right?
Well, it's funny. It's funny though you say that. So 11 Labs is one of the better ones. And I did actually do this the other week in order to test it again. I've been testing voice cloning for a number of years now, and it has got better and better, but there's still a slight uncanny valley where it's like, oh, I wouldn't pronounce it like that. And also, this is the other thing, as much as I am AI positive, I also think it is disruptive to our business model. And the fact is, you should be able to charge more for a human narration than for an AI narration. And because I am a narrator, I prefer to charge more for my human narration. So for now, I am not cloning my voice, and I'm going to record my own audio. But I do think within the next couple of years, it's going to be much, even better and indistinguishable.
Oh,
And
yeah.
again, people need to know that so they can be careful as well as enjoy it. I mean, to be frank, I listen to audio on like 1.5 speed, so everyone
Yep.
sounds a little robotic.
Right, me too. Yeah, absolutely. But I think with the human touch, especially for fiction, it's a performance. When you have a good audio narrator, I believe it's a performance, and we're not close for AI to do that. But for a nonfiction book, I could totally see where that would come in handy and be, not so cost prohibitive, because if you hire, a professional to narrate your book, that's expensive. That's not a cheap date.
I like the idea of charging more for a human narration,
Yeah,
almost like an
absolutely.
original, an
Yeah.
original piece of art, and then prints are, more AI. I think that's a neat idea.
But also, I like the idea of stratification of rights. So, for example, you take my voice and you take Patrick's voice as a male American older man, and somebody might want to listen to Writing the Shadow. They might want the content of Writing the Shadow, but they might want it in Patrick's voice. They don't want to listen to an English female voice. They want an American male voice. And I say this because most of the self-help books we get here in the UK are all narrated by American men. So I'm thinking that actually it would be very good if I could sell my human narration with my voice for my nonfiction, but as the consumer, you could also maybe listen on an app where you could choose an Indian accent or an American accent or a man or a young man or whatever you want in whatever accent, and also whatever language. And this is where AI really comes into its own, is you could listen, in Jodi's voice in Spanish. And that is going to be the killer app, really. It's going to be saying, look, we're used to having one product for an audiobook, but that's not how it should be. It should be completely dependent on what the customer wants. And in that way, we're going to sell a lot more audio in a lot more languages and accents and all of that, plus the original human narration. So I'm excited about it. I think there are always difficulties in technological change, but there are also some really exciting opportunities.
I totally agree. I was listening to Gary V, his podcast. He called AI the tractor. He said, way back when, people were scared to death of this new fandangled thing, the tractor. It's going to take away jobs from farmers. It made their job. Yeah, did it take some jobs away? Yes, but it made a lot of people's lives a lot easier, and then it produced new jobs.
Yes, although I worry about that analogy, because isn't it something like, it used to be something like 80% of people worked on the land, and now it's less than 1%.
Yeah, maybe it would be so drastic. Yes.
But I do agree, we all do other things. And again, that is the way to look at it, as an amplifier of the things we really want to do, rather than something. Yes, things will change, things are changing, but things always change, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Your life, Jodi, from when you were bringing up 4 kids as a military wife to now as a, best-selling fiction author, this is a different life.
Completely different world. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like FaceTime, for example, for military people, then they can FaceTime with their spouse all the time. And when we were going through, if my husband left, he was gone. And then, weeks later he'd come home, and that was it. We didn't even call because it was so expensive back then. So it's it's a good thing, I think, in the realm.
Yes, I agree. So let's go back in time a little bit with you, Joanna. Can you tell us the moment you realized that you could make a living as a writer, entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I've never liked the word authorpreneur.
Oh, you did. Oh, I thought you did. Sorry.
It's so funny. Some people think that I made it up or that I started using it. I never did. I like author, entrepreneur, two separate
Okay.
words.
All right.
But yeah, in terms of when I started back in 2006, I started writing seriously for publication, as in I always wrote stuff in my journals and I was like, right, I'm going to write a book. And then I looked at the publishing industry and saw how long things would take. And I started to look at the time I was getting into professional speaking, and I looked at what they were doing, and they were selling books at the back of the room. And then I also this was the beginning of sort of when blogging started to make money. So I met a lot of bloggers who were making money online. And this was also, again, the technology changes. 2007 was when the Kindle and the iPhone were launched. So that moment in time was when I was starting to get into this. And there's still a video on YouTube of me holding up, a phone and going, I can put a book on this, amazing. And at the time it was through Smashwords. So KDP didn't allow non-US authors to publish at the beginning.
Oh,
So it was
wow.
through Smashwords. Yeah, exactly. Things have changed. But
Yeah.
so essentially I knew, I'm not sure, I didn't know I could make a living, but I knew I could make some money online because I saw other people doing it. And so that's one tip for people is find a model, find someone who is doing this already, and they act as a sort of encouragement for you. And then look at how they're making a living, and then you can look at something similar too. And then in 2008 was when I started the Creative Penn, and I actually started to sell. And when I got that first sort of $1.67 off Amazon, I was like, oh my goodness, if I can make $1.67 from someone I don't know in America, then I can maybe make a bit more than that. Maybe I could make that every day, a couple of dollars every day, it will add up. And for sure, it adds up, as you know, with more books, with more readers, and again, with expansion in technology. This was at a time when we still put adapters into the car tape deck in order to try and
Oh, yeah,
play
absolutely. Yes.
like an MP3.
Yes. I remember that.
Remember that time? So
Yep.
Oh, goodness.
essentially, that was, I knew from the beginning that I could make some money. And then I really, from there, kind of started to level up in terms of what I could do. And every year, I guess, I've just taken advantage of whatever's come along next in terms of, okay, great, we can do that now. Let's do that. And keep expanding the countries I sell in, the formats I sell in, all of that.
Now in
Well, and you've been
2000,
an sorry, Petra.
no, in 2011, you left your cube
Yes.
to go full time as an author entrepreneur. Do you remember that like moment in time? You're just like, hey, I'm done. I'm gonna go for it.
Well, yeah, because I was really miserable in my job. I was crying like every day. I just
Oh,
hated it. And I was in one of those buildings that it was either a sick building, they call it here, like a sick building where there's something wrong with the atmosphere, or I was just really not good in a good space anymore. And my husband, who's incredibly supportive, said, well, what's the point? Don't stay anymore. But because I've been writing since sort of 2006 and publishing since 2008, I was making a little bit of money, but I essentially cut my income about from 100% to 10%. Like it
oh
went
wow.
down 90%.
That's
But
big.
it is, but we sold our house, we sold our investments, we got rid of our debt, we downsized to a 1-bedroom flat, and my husband had a job. So we made big changes in order that I could take a chance on a new career. And then, so that was 2011, and it was 2015 when I started making as much money. And then since then, I've made more money than the day job every year. But it was certainly at the beginning, it was a big drop. But I did say to my husband, Jonathan, look, if I can't do this within 6 months, I'll still be able to get another contract,
Oh,
because I was
okay.
an IT contractor. I was like, if
Yeah.
in 6 months' time I'm not making a dent in some way, I'll go back, I'll get another job. And thankfully, I've never had to do that.
I'm sorry, I cut you off, Jodi. Did you want to say something?
Oh, I simply was just going to follow that up with that. Joanna's an industry leader in all of the things that you do. You're always someone that we, as the rest of the pack, can follow. And I just appreciate that very much.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think it's another principle from back in the early days of the blogging thing. It was very much learn in public and show people what you're doing. And it was a sort of a generosity, I suppose, of spirit, is that we all learn together. And I think that spirit really is in the indie community. I think we've always been that way, which is, and perhaps sometimes we're oversharing these days in some of the Facebook groups. It's like, really, is that necessary? But I do think that sharing how things work, we can iterate a lot faster when we're talking about it. And sharing what we're doing. And, you know, again, technology allows us. I have a YouTube channel, and people share stuff, don't they, online?
Sure. Absolutely. Now, Joanna, most of your career, it looks like, to us at least, that you've been peeking around the business corners and making the right choices. You know, some examples are podcasting, self-publishing, AI, direct selling, Kickstarter, just to name a few. What do you attribute that to? Because, like, from my vantage point looking in, it's like, man, she is a guru of business. She really, you get in like at the right time. What do you attribute to that to?
Well, I'm laughing because you listed some of the good things.
Yeah,
One of
what, there's bad?
probably
What?
one of the, well, there's two examples of where I was definitely too early and it cost me. One is that I did a massive print run of several thousand books when I was living in Australia, thinking that I didn't know you had to know about marketing. I just thought you printed books and then somehow they sold
They
themselves.
magically just disappeared. Yeah.
Yeah, but I ended up putting most of those in the landfill. So that was one mistake where
Oh,
I was early in printing books to sell, but
okay.
I didn't know about marketing. But that mistake led to me learning about marketing. And then the second mistake, too early, was I got into translations in 2014 and spent money getting translations in German and other Spanish, Italian, in order to, because I was so excited about this. And then, of course, I was about 3 years too early for the German market and about 7 years too early for some of those other markets. And again, it cost me, and I haven't gone back to it because it was just so painful. So there's some lessons learned for people. But in terms of the rest of it, so I read a lot and I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I go to a lot of conferences. I am, for those who like Clifton Strengths, I'm very high with input is in my top 5. Learner is my number 1. Intellections in my top 5. Strategic and futuristic are in my top 5. So I'm basically kind of designed to take in information and then turn it into actionable things that I can share with people. And also I do have a bias for action. So I just do stuff. And so, yeah, I guess I started direct selling from day one. Like as soon as I had a website in 2008, I was selling direct. I had been talking about AI since 2016, but it is all very much from signals out there and things that I see and listen to. It's not out of nowhere. So,
Right.
you know, maybe people in the author community listen to my podcast to find out what's going on. Well, I listen to a ton of other podcasts and read all the latest books on this stuff and go to the conferences on AI and stuff like that. So it's definitely just being curious. I think curiosity is my number 1 recommendation. If you feel, and I know not everyone's interested in what I am interested in. So when I feel a sense of curiosity, I will dig deep into that. Whereas I won't, for example, I am almost completely off social media. It just doesn't do it for me. So
Okay.
I just don't do that. Whereas other people love social media and are not interested in learning some of this other stuff. So just in terms of what I think's potentially coming, people would have seen obviously direct selling and AI is really the trends for the next 20 years, I think is the beginning of this trend. But I do think VR and AR will be part of this. The Apple headset, if you think that the first iPhone came out in 2007, and then you remember when you bought an iPhone, and I remember,
Yep.
you know,
Absolutely.
it wasn't the first iteration, and
Right.
it might not have been the second, but it might have been the third or the fourth. And then you get to a point where you're like, how did I run my business or live my life without my phone? And we've got to think about that with these headsets, which will no doubt be completely different in the future. But I wrote my first article about VR for authors and publishing in 2015.
Wow.
So I'm like almost a decade early on that, but I still think it's going to be a really awesome way to sell books. To do this, instead of doing this on a flat screen, we might be doing this in a VR room with our avatars, with other people who could come hang out with us. And in terms of products, I'm interested in, there'll be a lot of buying in VR that then results in a physical product turning up at your door like we do online, but also experiences in VR or AR. Like you can walk around London and I'll be there giving you a tour of the places that are in my book. So again, exciting times ahead.
We have a finite amount of time every day, and you seem very strategic in the way you spend your time, Joanna. You said you listen to some podcasts or read some books. Do you have any specifics?
I do so much. I mean, I'm very, I process things pretty fast. So I subscribe to some, since we're on a podcast, I'll recommend a podcast I really like, which is Hard Fork.
Hard Fork?
Hard Fork with Kevin Roose and Casey Newton. It's from the New York Times. That and it is about AI. So if people are interested, it's AI specifically. Kevin wrote a really good book called Future Proof, something like How to Be Human in an Age of AI. So that is one I listen to every single week. But then also I all the latest books on AI. And in talking of social media, I do actually now, I had kind of left Twitter like everyone else, but I've gone back to it as X, as more of a news feed for tech. And I'm finding it quite a good source of tech news. So, and the X algorithm is really good. So whereas I used to have to curate lists and things on Twitter, and I would follow certain people, now I just use their algorithm. And once you train an algorithm, you like things, tell it what you like, and then it will serve you more of that. And so I've kind of trained my X algorithm to feed me a lot of really good news from high quality sources. So again, if people want to learn, whether it's AI, whatever you want to learn about, like canine stuff or whatever you're doing, you train your feeds and you curate your feeds. I tend to go big at first. Like I went on with Substack, I'll subscribe to like 50 newsletters and then very quickly whittle it down to 2 or 3, basically.
Interesting. Very good. So let me ask you, Joanne, were you having more fun when this was all new compared to now?
It's new every day, Patrick. I kid you not.
That's so true.
Because I love the technology space and I love what's going on in AI. It's like I wake up in the morning and I am excited to check my X feed. Isn't that sad? But no, I'm like, what has happened overnight? I mean, like last week it was Sora, Sora. I don't know if you've seen this. No, you haven't seen it. This is huge. Text to video. It's OpenAI's new text to video model.
Yep.
Can generate up to 60 seconds of video.
Yes. You were talking about that on your podcast, your last podcast.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. If you go and have a look, so OpenAI and then put in Sora, it is, I mean, it's blowing up. It's blowing up at the moment. And the morning that happened, everyone was like, what just happened? How is that? And then after this, in fact, the meeting I've got after this, I'm looking into Gemini 1.5, which is Google's new model, where your input, what you input in the context window, where you might put your prompt, the input window is up to 750,000 words. So you can essentially read your entire, I'm going to read in my entire series and then try and create like a world Bible that way. So a task I have put off since I started writing.
Wow. So that's how you keep it fresh then, huh?
Oh, it is fresh every single day, Patrick. And I mean, for writing books, I think I'm writing a new novel at the moment called Spear of Destiny. And you both know this. We don't write because it's easy. No. That's not the point. We write because we have to, and we think this way, and this is just what we do. And so it's hard for me to write another novel. And so that's new every day. This morning I was at my desk writing my fiction. So yeah, it's still different. The moment it gets terrible, and there have been a few moments where I was like, am I done?
Yeah.
Is it time for me to retire from the community, not from writing?
Right.
But then something new happens and it's exciting again.
So passion, Joanna, I see you as a very passionate person. I was at 20 books and that one panel regarding AI. We're going to bounce back to AI again, I guess. And, you're very passionate about how you felt and about that, etc. Are you passionate about everything like that or just specific things?
I actually I don't think of myself as passionate. I think enthusiastic you can have,
Okay.
but I feel like passion is something that burns out and is
Hmm.
not something that lasts. No one can be passionate
Oh,
forever.
okay. All right. All right.
I think I prefer enthusiastic and again I'll come back to curiosity. I think I'm curious about things, and then once I've kind of mastered that, I don't want to talk about it anymore. So
Okay.
you might have noticed, like on my podcast, I don't want to talk about book marketing. It's so boring to me. And I don't want to talk about how to self-publish a book. Like seriously,
Mhm.
like look at my website, go check anywhere else,
Right.
because these things are boring. What's interesting is how we create business models. I love business and the technology side and all that, and each other. We're all interesting. But so I'm curious to the point where I'm not curious anymore, and then I won't talk about it.
Okay. Well, kind of talking about marketing, giving away the farm.
I
You
don't
know,
talk about marketing.
yeah, okay, well, just a little bit. Yeah, giving away the farm. When do you think it's appropriate and effective? Because you give away a lot of stuff. You really do. You give away content, you give away advice, your podcast, your website, all of that. When do you think it's appropriate and effective?
I think Jodi should answer that before I do.
Okay.
I don't give anything away. No,
Yes,
that's
you
not
do.
true. Oh gosh. I think there's a degree of strategy in giving things away, and I think there's a degree of service, and I think both are important. So I think both feed you. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but
What do
that's
you
kind of
give
how I look
away?
at it.
What do you
Well,
give
I
away
have,
as a fiction author?
of course, I have, the lead magnet kind of things that I give away. Um, you know, that's easy. I have audio and ebook giveaway books that lead into, so that's the more strategic that lead into my series. And as far as other kinds of things, just participating in the community and sharing your experience and helping somebody the next step up their way too, as someone helped me, that kind of thing. I think that's one of the things I think is so wonderful about the indie community is, for the most part, people are really willing to help each other out. And I love that about the community.
Hmm. Well, I agree. And to add to it, you mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk, who I learned from back in the day,
Oh yeah.
Patrick as well. I even have a selfie of me with Gary V
Oh,
at
you
one of his
do? Oh, cool.
events. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
a
very
big fan of
much,
his.
yeah, I kind of used to be, but he's pretty intense.
Oh yeah, he is.
Yeah, so I don't really listen to him anymore. But he certainly set a lot of people off on the freemium model, freemium
Mhm.
being some is free and some is premium. So giving away the farm is not, there's no point in giving away the farm if you want to make some money.
Right.
So like Jodi said, you give away a first book in series, which new authors think is just awful. But
Yep.
once you've written a few books, it's not such a big deal. With the aim that they buy other books. And this is the really important thing. What we're doing is, yes, we want to help people, but if we want to make a living this way, or we want to make some money on our books, you can't just give away everything. So generosity is really important, but it needs to have a point. So when I learned this from the early bloggers, it was, and in fact, Gary has the title of his book, right? Give, jab, 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 right hook.
Yeah, right.
Which is a little of a violent metaphor.
Well, I used to be
Which
a
is,
boxer, so I loved it. I was just like, yeah.
yes, but it's a little aggressive, but it's kind of give, and then ask. And so on my podcast, for example, which has been going for 14 plus years, 99% of what's out there is free. You can listen to my podcast, you can listen to this podcast, but I've had a Patreon for many years, which is premium. It's only a couple of dollars, but that's enough. If enough people pay a couple of dollars for the behind the scenes extras, including tutorials on AI, then I make money. I also have corporate sponsorships, from people who want to talk to my audience. I also obviously talk about my own work, so it's marketing. But yeah, one tip for people, if you're on a podcast like this, never ever say, like if the host asks you a question, never say, oh, that's in my book, and basically refuse to answer the question.
Oh, okay.
That when you say giving away the farm, that's when you give it away. Give away your best tips on a podcast, especially when you're talking about your book, and people will go and buy your book. The difference with fiction, obviously, is you don't want to give away your big twist or your like whatever the secret is. But certainly with nonfiction, give as much as you can, and people will then buy from you. And I think that's a generally good principle. But you do have to think strategically, which is what Jodi said, which is, what are you giving away in order for what to happen? So otherwise you're running just a charity, which is fine if that's what you want to run, but you have to think about it from a business perspective too. And so then you can be happy and also wealthy.
Yay. I like that. So let's switch gears here. Let's talk about audio. Here is your book, Audio for Authors, Joanna, which I
thank you.
absolutely love. It is highlighted. I have stuff underlined. I first bought the audio format of Audio for Authors, and I'm like, I can't remember all this stuff. I have to have the paperback, so I would highly recommend this book, especially if I love the podcasting stuff, because that's what I'm doing, but you have actionable, like, real life scenarios. You have like examples of pitches, both good and bad, and I got a chuckle with the bad ones. It's like, you could tell that, hey, this person has never listened to your podcast. They really don't know who you are. And it's like, hey, I just want to be on your show. Okay.
Yeah. And that, I mean, you probably get them too. I get every single day, maybe 5 a day. And people have clearly not even listened, but they all have the same thing, which is, I really enjoyed your episode on, and they've just picked some random episode.
Absolutely.
And pitched a topic that has nothing to do with my show.
But again, what I really loved about the book is you give actionable advice. It's not theory. It's not like vague, generalities. It's meat and potatoes. And I absolutely love meat and potatoes. So thank you.
I have that book too. And there's more underlined than there is not.
I'm so glad. Helpful. And let me tell you why that book happened. It's because my brother, who is a photographer, messaged me on WhatsApp and said, I want to start a podcast. What should I know?
And this was 3 sentences or less.
And I was just like, oh crap. There is so much I need to say. I need to write a book on it. And that's kind of how that book came. And that's how I've written all my nonfiction books. It's apart from my memoir, but all my self-help books are like, people keep asking the questions. And so you need to have something to give. Amusingly though, that book doesn't sell a lot. So you two are, I'm very grateful for you.
Well, we're very grateful for you.
Yeah, I think it was very well written. And like I said before, it actually gives really, really good advice that, that was my little world. And I'm just like, yeah, this kicks butt. I really, really enjoyed it. So way to go. But let's talk about podcasting. It seems like the competition is increasing. One example of podcasting is the popularity of comedians and writers who were out of work, more or less, due to COVID restrictions, the strike, all that kind of stuff. And they found great success in podcasting. Do you think podcasting is still a viable money-making strategy? And if there's someone out there thinking about starting their own podcast, what's your advice to them?
Well, first of all, you don't start a podcast for the money.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you know this. It takes a lot of time. There is a lot of competition at the bottom, like anything, and we know this with our books too. Jodi with so many books in the last few years. It's amazing. And also, as the years go by and the number of books you've written, and in terms of podcasting, the number of episodes you have, your competition gets less and less and less. So I have a bit of a rule which says, I won't go on a podcast until they have hit 50 episodes.
Oh, okay.
Because most podcasts don't last 20 episodes.
Yeah, pod fade. They call that pod fade. Yeah.
Because people realize, they're like, oh, I didn't just make $1 million overnight. A bit like people with their first book, they're like,
Yes.
oh, I'm going to make $1 million next week. And then they're not. And only if you love it can you continue. So when I started podcasting in 2009, it wasn't even a thing to make money with podcasting. I didn't have any friends. Author friends, I should say. I didn't have any author friends. And I wanted to meet people. I was in Australia. I wanted to meet Americans. And this was a great way to do it. And it has been. It's been a networking thing first. But in terms of tips, first of all, you need to be in a niche. So you do need to have a target audience in mind. If you want to make money, you should have something to sell. Because even if your audience is small, if you have some call to action that involves signing up for an email list or getting here's my book or whatever, then that's going to at least bring something. And if you want corporate sponsorship money or ad money, you have to prove your download numbers.
Yes.
So you need a host that will provide those in a verifiable manner, and then you can get certain amount of money per 1,000 downloads. And that is where I think what you're saying, Patrick, is true. People start by looking at the CPM, and then actually most podcasts don't get 1,000 downloads per episode. So let's break that down. What if you get 50 downloads of your podcast? 50 people, and you're like, oh, that's not good. But then you say, okay, well, do you want to go and speak to this audience of 50 people and talk about your book? And people are like, yeah, that sounds great. 50 people in a room. That's amazing. I'll go and do that. And the difference with podcasting is those 50 people might be across 50 different countries, which is kind of cool.
It is.
Yeah, I would say to people, look, you need to think longer term. You need to think niche. You need to be more curious and be more about networking, and the money, have some idea of how you want to make money. But I don't think that's the main reason to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And for those starting, Pat Flynn has a bunch of free tutorials on YouTube. Like he walks you through every step of the podcasting, the technical stuff, everything. And his big saying is, the riches are in the niches. Like what you were saying, Joanna, and it's true. If you got a niche down, but there are free ways to start it. I use Buzzsprout for, my platform. And my advice to people too is don't do the free stuff. There's different options, but a lot of time the free stuff, you don't own the rights to your property, to your intellectual property. But if you pay the subscription model, you do. So make sure you take a look at that. I think that's super huge.
Yeah, and that's even more important for this longer term view. So I started with Blueberry as a host, BLUBRRY, back in 2009, and I've been with Blueberry ever since. And they're a brilliant little independent hosting company. They're so cool. They're really the most indie of them all. And other people have been bought or have sold the business or have been eaten up by giants, or have ended up in these other things, and Blueberry have just stayed indie. I still love them.
So Jodi, where's your podcast? Is it coming?
I don't have a podcast or plans to have one. I enjoy being on your podcast.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think that's important though. So Jodi, what do you get out of coming on other people's podcasts as an author? Because that is the reality of what most people want to do and should do, to be honest.
Sure. Well, I enjoy meeting other authors that I wouldn't normally meet, like yourself. But also, I always see a bump in sales, frankly, when I'm on Patrick's podcast and other podcasts. So that's nice. That's always good. And I just think it's just a really enjoyable thing to do. And I'm a podcast junkie listener. If I have every second I'm listening to a podcast, and it could be anything. I share the curiosity. I'm curious about so many things that I just can't learn enough. And so just constant taking it in. And I love podcasts because you can speed it up and you can listen in different ways when you're out doing things. So I really enjoy it.
All right.
I think maybe that is the overarching tip, is you're a listener. That's how you can do this, is because you listen and you know the etiquette, you know how to behave,
That's
you
true.
know
Yes.
how things work. And also you would know how to pitch if you wanted to, because you listen to these shows. And this is true whether you're writing in a different genre, whether you're going to an event, whether you're joining an organization. You have to be part of that. You can't just kind of airdrop in and try and make it up on the fly. You have to be part of the community. And so, yeah, I can see why you do that. And I would just say that to people as well, just to, as we come to an end, join, be part of the community. And before you're trying to sort of prove yourself in any way, just kind of jump in, be part of the community. And then over time, I mean, Patrick, you and I met for the first time at Author Nation, having spoken before.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and when you asked me to come on your podcast, I say yes, because I know you and we've connected over the years, and these relationships, they do last. Not everyone, obviously, but a lot of people,
Right.
you know, you meet them over time and that builds up, and that's part of why we do this. We're part of a vibrant community, and that is a lovely thing.
Absolutely. Well, like Joanna said, we are going to be wrapping this up here real quickly. I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you. Is there a favorite book you like to give as a gift, or do you do that?
I give books as gifts, but they're always different depending on the person I'm giving them to.
Okay. What books do you read for fun or to refill your creative well?
I read all the time, audiobooks. I read fiction. I've got books surrounding me all over the floor here. And yeah,
Okay.
I read pretty much everything. I don't read romance. I'm a bit darker. I'm, you know, with the darker side.
All right. And time for the Sophie's Choice question. What's the favorite book that you wrote and why?
The favorite book is always the next one.
How about you, Jodi?
I'm curious and I want the next book.
How about you, Jodi?
That's a good point. But I think, honestly, my book is not my most well-written, but it is my favorite because I think it's most me. It really incorporates me and my life more than any of the other books. So.
Awesome. All right, Joanna, if you had a billboard that you could put any message on where millions of people could see it, what would that message be? It could be a quote or just a saying, or what do you think?
I would put Memento Mori. Remember, you will die.
Well, that's nice and cheery.
Yeah, no, I think the point is that it is cheery because we have to remember that life is short, and you know, police, military people here, you know that people's lives can be cut short.
Very.
And just that quote, and I think about it all the time. You can see my sugar skull on the video. There's my skull there, and my JF Penn logo is a skull and a sugar skull, and all of this. And remember, you will die. It just helps you focus on what's important and stop doing all the pointless stuff. Stop doing the stuff you hate doing. Focus on what you really want to achieve, the books you want to create, and yeah, hopefully that will focus people.
All right, where can we find both of you? Not in a nefarious way, but to learn more about you guys and your books. Joanna, where do we go?
My podcast is the Creative Penn Podcast, Penn with a double N. My nonfiction is under Joanna Penn, and my fiction is JF Penn.
Jodi, where do we go to find you?
You can find everything about me on jodi-burnett.com. I have a shop and books for sale there and history, everything.
Okay, well, very good. Jodi, thank you so much for being my co-host today. Joanna,
thanks for having me.
Thank you for everything you've done to help authors, including myself. You've touched so many people. I don't think you realize this in this industry. When I bring up your name, people start gushing for the most part. They're like, oh my God, it's Joanna Penn. Oh, but you've given a ton. You really have. And just as a voice of a whole lot of other people, thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you so much to you both. And I think we're all passing this on, and you both help other people in turn. So yes, a really good positive end. Thanks so much for having me.
You betcha.